Over the weekend, Putin claimed electoral victory in a display of his regime's disdain for the Russian people. With a fresh 6-year term in office, he's on track to pass Joseph Stalin as the longest ruling despot in modern Russian history. For the past 2 years, Putin has sacrificed tens of thousands of his countrymen on the altar of an obscene neo-Soviet fantasy of Stalinist empire building. The human cost of Russia's war of aggression to Russians and Ukrainians alike is truly tragic. But this weekend's sham election came at a particularly critical moment in this conflict, and the Kremlin is showing its cards. Former Russian President Medvedev laid out exactly how Putin intends for his lawless conquest to end. Here's what he said: "The entire territory of Ukraine is the territory of the Russian Federation. As he sees it, Ukraine's complete and unconditional surrender, full demilitarization, and reparations to Russia will help forge a benevolent consensus of peace." Now, this is from a close ally of Vladimir Putin, the autocrat who said that negotiating with Ukraine just because it's running out of ammunition was ridiculous. Russia has been showing us its intentions for over 2 years now. But for anyone who still struggles to see what's going on here, the words of Russia's leaders leave no room for doubt. As I've said before, Putin and his allies are emboldened precisely because the West is hesitating, because America is hesitating. They're spelling out their true intentions because they sense that we might not have the resolve to actually resist them. Here's the truth: Russia is playing for keeps. It's set on subjugating its sovereign democracy, whole hog. There is every reason to believe the war ends with a negotiated outcome. Most wars do, but it's absurd and self-defeating to insist on negotiations without preparing Ukraine to operate from a position of strength. Whether or when Putin ever decides to turn from his bid for total conquest to the negotiating table, it'll be lethal Western assistance that determines what comes next. That is why Congress does need to influence the eventual outcome of the conflict. What we do will determine whether an administration that wants to facilitate negotiations has the leverage to produce terms favorable to America and our allies. Our next move will either reaffirm America's global influence or kneecap both Washington and Kyiv. Anyone who thinks starving partners of support is good diplomacy or politics needs only look at the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan. If Congress does its job, it'll be American weapons in Ukrainian hands, and stronger forces and defense industrial capacity here at home that determine what conclusions the world draws from the first major land war in Europe since 1945. Whether or not authoritarians conclude they can continue to redraw maps by force, whether or not America's top strategic competitor concludes that we're not prepared to defend our interests or equip our friends to defend ourselves, and whether or not the commander-in-chief inherits an unfixable quagmire. Every day that the National Security Supplemental spends as a Senate-passed bill and not a law is the day that America's adversaries smile. The decision before Congress, both in annual appropriations as well as the supplemental, are about more than Ukraine or Israel. They're about whether America has the will to defend our interests and uphold our influence.